Connor Grayson was the type who vanished among bookshelves. A 36-year-old man with hazel eyes hidden behind worn-out framed glasses and brown hair that had already started to yield to a few grey strands at the temples. He wasn't invisible for being insignificant, but because his bookstore had enough personality to outshine any presence. The establishment was located on a traditional shopping street where century-old buildings resisted the modernity of big stores. It was a place where time seemed to flow more slowly. Dark wooden shelves reached up to the high ceiling, sliding ladders allowed access to all the literary treasures, and an old record player softly played jazz throughout the day. The aroma was a blend of old paper, fresh coffee from the small coffee maker behind the counter, and the light vanilla scent of the cleaning products Connor used on the shelves. "Good afternoon, Mr. Grayson. Did you find that Steinbeck edition I mentioned last week?" asked an elderly man with white hair, a regular customer. "Professor Miller, it arrived just yesterday. I was saving it for you," replied Connor with a genuine smile, emerging from behind the counter. These small interactions were his favourite chapters of the day. Connor knew each customer by their literary tastes, not by their personal lives. He knew that Professor Miller preferred classics, that Mrs. Calloway always looked for biographies of pioneering women, and that the teenager with coloured hair who came by on Fridays loved obscure science fiction. When the doorbell jingled for the last time, usually around 7 in the evening, Connor followed an impeccable routine. He organised the returned books back to their places, counted the cash register, swept the wooden floor, and turned off the lights, leaving only the small lamp in the display window lit, like a beacon for nighttime passers-by. The walk home was short, just 3 blocks. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a brick building without an elevator. It was a place that could be cosy if it had more than bookshelves, a worn-out armchair and a bed. The kitchen rarely saw anything beyond simple sandwiches and tea. The walls barely had any pictures, just one of his late mother and another of the old dog he had in his adolescence. Connor usually dined while reading, with a plate balanced on a cushion on his lap. Sometimes he would stop in the middle of a paragraph and look out the window, contemplating the city lights, feeling that familiar pang of solitude. It wasn't unhappiness. He loved his life among the books, but there were empty spaces that even the best stories couldn't fill. The only break in his routine happened every morning at 8:27 a.m. Connor always arrived at the bookstore by 8:15 a.m. to organise everything before the 9 a.m. opening. But at 8:27 a.m., he invariably interrupted whatever task he was doing and positioned himself near the shop window, pretending to arrange the books on display. It was on one of those mornings 9 months ago that he saw her for the first time. A woman who seemed to have stepped out of the pages of one of his novels. Wavy red hair catching the sunlight, a determined yet graceful walk, and always carrying a worn leather bag that seemed about to overflow. She wore floral dresses on warm days and a navy blue coat on cold days, and every day at 8:27 a.m. she would pass by the bookstore's window. Sometimes she smiled at some private thought, other times she bit her lip as if rehearsing what she would say at an important meeting. On rainy days, she opened a red umbrella that contrasted with the grey of the city. She never entered the bookstore, but she often slowed her pace as she passed by the window. Connor invented an entire life for her. He imagined she would be a literature teacher, or perhaps a writer. He decided that she probably liked mint tea and preferred cats over dogs. In his most daring daydreams, he imagined that one day she would walk into the shop, pick up a book of poetry, and smile at him, starting a conversation that would last for hours. But the reality was that Connor never found the courage to do more than watch her through the fogged glass on colder mornings, or the clean shop window on spring days. The morning that would change everything began with an unexpected storm. The sky dawned grey with heavy clouds promising a heavy rain. Connor hurriedly walked to the bookstore, the newspaper folded over his head as improvised protection. Inside the shop, he turned on the lights, switched on the old heater that made a comforting hum, and put a Chet Baker record on the turntable. At 8:25 a.m. he positioned himself near the shop window, as always. The rain was now pouring down violently, making noise on the store's awning. She won't come today, he thought, feeling a pang of disappointment. But at 8:27 a.m, there she was, on the other side of the street. The red umbrella was battling against the wind as she waited to cross. The light turned green, and she took her first step onto the crosswalk. That's when everything happened too fast. A car approached skidding, trying to brake on the wet road. She slipped while attempting to step back, falling backwards. The red umbrella flew like a leaf in the wind. Her head hit the asphalt with an impact that Connor almost felt. He didn't remember leaving the store. One moment he was behind the glass. The next he was in the middle of the street, raising his hand to stop the traffic, kneeling beside her in the rain. "Don't move," he said, his voice firmer than he ever imagined it could be. "Help is already on the way." There was blood mixing with the rainwater. Her eyes, green like young leaves, he noticed, were half closed, unfocused. "The bookstore," she murmured before losing consciousness. Time expanded and contracted in strange ways after that. Connor remembered holding her hand while they waited for the ambulance, how people formed a protective circle around them, someone offering an umbrella. In the hospital, the organized chaos of the emergency room swallowed him. Doctors and nurses moved with purpose while he remained like an island of uncertainty in the midst of the rush. "Are you a relative?" asked a nurse with a tired but kind look. Connor hesitated. What was he? A stranger? An observer? A man who knew the exact time she passed by his shop, but didn't know her name? "I am someone who cares about her a lot." The nurse nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense. She did not correct the doctor when he approached, calling him the patient's boyfriend. He didn't have the strength to deny it. "What is her name?" asked the doctor, filling out a form. "I didn't," Connor began, feeling himself blush. Evelyn Foster," replied a voice behind him. Connor turned to find a middle-aged couple with worried expressions. The man had grey hair and wore glasses similar to his own. The woman had the same red hair as Evelyn, although shorter. "We're her parents. Someone found her bag with her phone. We were the number saved as emergency," the woman explained, extending her hand. "Jennifer and William Foster. You must be—" "Connor Grayson," he responded automatically, shaking the offered hand. "I saw the accident." "He's her boyfriend and the one who rescued her," the nurse added, giving Connor a meaningful look before moving away. The next moments were confusing. Somehow, between halting explanations about the accident and waiting for news, Evelyn's parents interpreted that Connor was more than just a good Samaritan, and he couldn't undo the misunderstanding. "Evelyn never told us she was dating, but she's always been very private, always keeping her life a surprise," Jennifer said, holding his hand. "Severe concussion but no intracranial bleeding," the doctor announced, returning. "She is sedated now. I advise you to return tomorrow. She will likely remain unconscious for a while." William thanked him and then turned to Connor. "We came from Clearwater, an hour away from here. Evelyn is our only daughter. We were planning to visit her next week, but when we heard about the accident—" "Please take this," Jennifer interrupted, handing Connor the red umbrella and her bag recovered from the accident scene. "I'm sure she would like you to take care of this for now." And so, holding a red umbrella and an ever-growing secret, Connor found himself entering a story he hadn't planned to write. The days that followed seemed unreal. The bookstore was temporarily under the care of Marta, a retired former literature teacher who sometimes helped Connor on weekends. With that, he started to divide his time between the hospital and Evelyn's apartment, where her parents were staying to closely follow their daughter's recovery. Jennifer and William welcomed him with a kindness that surprised Connor. There was always an invitation for dinner, a cup of hot tea, or a conversation at the end of the day. Gradually, he started to feel like part of that small family unit, so at ease that the initial misunderstanding about his relationship with Evelyn seemed impossible to undo. With each new encounter, Connor discovered more about the woman he had only observed through the shop window. Evelyn was an editor at a small but respected literary publishing house. Her apartment reflected who she was, full of colours, plants in every corner, photos in different frames, and curious objects from travels. A home that told stories in every detail, the complete opposite of the solitary simplicity of Connor's own home. On the fourth day, while Connor was reading aloud to the still unconscious Evelyn, Jennifer quietly entered the room. "She always loved being read to," she commented, smiling at the book of poetry in his hands. "You know, Connor, on the day of the accident when we found out about you, we were so happy. She has always been so independent, so career-focused." Connor swallowed hard. "Well, we're not." Jennifer smiled. "I understand that you two must be just getting to know each other, but the way you look at her and your dedication to her makes me hopeful that she has found someone special. It was wrong, deeply wrong, but also strangely right. As if destiny had written that story for them, just waiting for them to turn the page." On the seventh day, Connor was dozing in the hospital room's armchair when a movement woke him. Evelyn had moved her hand. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking several times, trying to focus her vision. He jumped up in surprise, approaching the bed. "I'll call the nurse." "Wait," she requested, her voice hoarse. Her eyes finally focused on his face. "You're the guy from the bookstore, aren't you?" Connor's heart raced. "Yes, Connor Grayson. You were in an accident." Evelyn frowned, seeming to process the information. "It was raining," she murmured. "There was a misunderstanding," Connor said hastily. "Your parents think that that we've been seeing each other, romantically. I tried to explain, but it all happened so quickly and they seemed so relieved to think that you weren't alone and—" To his surprise, Evelyn smiled faintly. "You're exactly as I imagined." "How?" "Honest, worried, kind." She paused. "I know it sounds strange, but I watched you every day through the window. I purposely walked by at the same time." Connor felt his face heat up. "I also saw you, every day at 8:27 a.m. 8:27 a.m., she repeated with a wider smile. "My lucky time. The number of the apartment where I grew up." The nurse entered at that moment, interrupting the conversation, but the look they exchanged said everything that words could not yet express. In the following days, while Evelyn was regaining her strength, they began to fill in the gaps in their lives. They both preferred old movies to blockbusters, that he had never travelled outside the country, while she had already visited 17 different countries, that he loved rainy days for reading, while she preferred reading in the sun. "Why did you never enter the bookstore?" Connor asked, 2 weeks after the accident, as they walked slowly through the hospital garden. Evelyn smiled shyly. "I wanted to have a perfect excuse. I was looking for a specific book, something that would finally justify talking to you. But actually, I think I was afraid." "Fear?" "That reality wouldn't be as good as my imagination. That you wouldn't notice my existence in the same way I noticed yours." Connor stopped, turning to look directly at her. "I noticed you on the first day. It was as if the doorbell rang, even with you outside." When Evelyn's parents returned to Clearwater, promising to come back for dinner the following month, Connor and Evelyn finally had an open conversation. "We don't need to continue with this," he said, as he helped her settle into her own apartment after being discharged from the hospital. "We can tell your parents the truth." Evelyn took his hand. "And what is the truth, Connor?" He hesitated. "That we met in the strangest way possible. That we started in the middle of a story instead of the beginning." "Maybe this is our beginning," she replied. "Isn't that how it happens in the best books? Stories start exactly when they need to begin." 3 months later, the bookstore had a new addition, a small cafe in the back corner, with round tables and comfortable chairs. Evelyn spent her afternoons off there, working on manuscripts while Connor attended to the customers. The doorbell still jingled, marking entries and exits, chapters opening and closing, And every morning at 8:27 they opened the store together. No longer watching each other through a storefront window, but side by side, turning the pages of the same book, living the same story. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.